Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in this video, I'm going to be continuing speaking about Nazi Germany and assessing propaganda and control. So the Nazis were horrific. I think we'd all agree. Why is it that they were able to come to power, and how is it they were able to maintain their power without significant grumbling right until the end? Well, really, it was propaganda. So Dr. Joseph Goebbels was the Minister for Propaganda and Popular Enlightenment, and he was the evil genius of the Third Reich. So he produced posters, films, books, songs, cinema newsreel images, newspaper articles, billboard posters, things of that nature, arranged rallies. Now, a lot of these media were far more important back then than they are now because, of course, there was no internet. And only towards the end of the Third Reich was there television in Germany, and very few people had televisions. They were ruinously expensive. A lot of people didn't have radios either until the end. Another thing about the Third Reich is they produced the People's Receiver, as in an affordable radio, hoping that every family would have one. So that's why a newspaper, not online, a physical newspaper, was much more important in those days. So their posters would invariably have a gigantic image of Hitler surrounded by adoring admirers. He would look stern and commanding, always striking a pose. Incidentally, people who met him in private, like Leni Riefenstahl, say he was quite different, affable, almost humble. So it was a front that he put on. There was this carapace of toughness, of sturdiness, and things like that. He was a poser. What else? Various slogans. We fight, you fight, and you work for victory. A slogan from the Second World War. Images of heroic, chisel-drawed soldiers going off to war, or joyful children, things like that, showing that everybody except the demonized sections of society were happy in the Third Reich. So the Third Reich was heavily dependent on state terror for control, but also propaganda. That was a key element of their means of maintaining control. Hitler had admired British propaganda in the Second World War on the basis that it was simple, and that was the thing about Nazi propaganda. It had to be simple, it had to be crude, endlessly repeated, not trying to challenge the beliefs of the majority, but simply reinforce them, turn these beliefs to help the National Socialist cause. So they've been quite effective from the early days. One of the reasons they chose red as a background colour for their flag is it was very eye-catching, using the symbol, the swastika. It actually comes from India, but swastik in Sanskrit is a symbol of the life cycle, death and rebirth and so forth. It should go the other way around. They should be pointing to the left, not to the right. It should be upright, not diagonal. So in various places in India, the keystones of buildings, you'll see the swastika, but it's nothing to do with the Third Reich. Various racist groups in Vienna had been using this before the First World War, and that's probably where Hitler first saw it. So they had a distinctive image, and incidentally, in 1935, they scrapped the German flag, the black, red, gold tricolour that they have today, and the swastika, the flag of the Nazi Party, became the national flag. So that's why it was totalitarian, a total identification of party with country. As I mentioned, Alfred Hugenberg, a media mogul, put his media outlets at the disposal of the Nazi movement in the late 1920s, and that boosted them a lot. Anyway, when they came to power in 1933, they took over cinema. Now, many actors and directors were of liberal and or left-wing sympathies, so not the sort of people the Nazis would approve of. People in the arts tend to be quite cosmopolitan. The Nazis were xenophobic and insular. So the Nazis produced a film soon after they came to office, Hitler Jung Quecks, as in a member of the Hitler Youth is called the Hitler Jung. And it is a stirring tale of daring do Quecks, who's handing out Nazi pamphlets, are set upon by a gang of communists and beaten to death. And as he draws his last breath, he gasps, "Heil Hitler." Anyway, it was self-indulgent and too self-referential. It went down like a Led Zeppelin. So Goebbels learnt a valuable lesson from that one. Films had to be no more than 10% political, as he said, because who would watch a film that's almost entirely about politics? It couldn't be laid on too thick. It had to be a genuinely good piece of cinematography. There had to be an intriguing plot line, superb acting, action, romance, beautiful actresses, music, some loathsome anti-heroes. It had to be a good entertainment in itself. Sugarcoat the pill, make it actually a fun thing to watch, and then have a latent political message. If it was too blatant, it put people off. So they made romantic comedies such as It's a Hopeless Case. The villain of the piece was invariably Jewish with stereotypical looks, not an actual Jewish person, a non-Jewish German, a Gentile, I suppose, because of course Jewish people were forbidden to appear in films or the theatre under the Third Reich. So Albert Speer, whom I mentioned earlier, he was an architect by profession. That was Hitler's métier manqué. And he was vital in the organization of the Nuremberg rallies, which were a important part of Nazi propaganda. Every September from 1923 onward, these took place. Incidentally, in the 20s, there hadn't always been a Nuremberg. So it was about in the middle of the country. And it was dating back to things that had been going on in the Middle Ages, a meeting shortly before the autumn equinox. So there'd be a huge crowd arranged in columns, standing. Hitler would come in late to build tension. Is he coming? Is he not going to come at all? And people would be muttering. He'd enter from the back, flanked by two lieutenants, and he'd walk up, he'd get to the podium, and then he'd stand there for a moment, and it would be building suspense. What's he going to say? And then finally he would start to speak quite quietly at first, but eventually working himself up into a lather of passion and fury. And he seemed to be able to express what the crowd was thinking. So he was a very talented rabble-rouser. But he always spoke without notes, and his speeches were supposedly extemporaneous. In fact, they weren't off the cuff at all. They were carefully studied. Anyway, he practiced in front of a few aides in the mirror and had photos taken. These contortions and gesticulations were all rehearsed. So the Nuremberg rallies, they stressed megalomania, male bonding, unity. There were men marching in mass formation, and people felt they're part of something mighty. As the saying goes, the devil has all the best tunes. Leave aside the ideology for a moment, and let's not think about the countless massacres committed by the Third Reich, but a lot of people find this alluring. It made them feel strong. It seemed somehow glamorous, impressive, and that's why it drew people in. So a lot of people who were otherwise reasonable and after the war quite decent people went along with this. Heinz Mettelmann was a member of the Hitler Youth and later in the German army, and he's often talked about what it was like to be an ordinary person who went along with Nazism. And he said sometimes Hitler would say something and there'd be a huge outburst of applause and cheering, and he would join in, and then he'd say, what did the person say? And even those who didn't believe in Nazism said they wished they could be part of it because it seemed to be so emotionally satisfying. So there'd be ecstatic applause several times. Now, where would you find neo-Nazis today? Well, where do they like to gather? They often gather at football matches. Now, there's nothing wrong with football or being a football fan, but I'm saying that a small number of football hooligans are neo-Nazis, not ordinary fans. Why? How is it similar to the Nuremberg rallies in any way? Because it's about bravado, ultranationalism, machismo, irrationalism, just a heightened emotion and identity politics, chanting. Anyway, so the Nazis were very strong in Franconia, and that's where Bavaria is. The police were very much on their side there. Julius Streicher was a very active Nazi, and he was the local Nazi party chief there. He was also a vicious anti-Semite, going around with a rhinoceros hide whip, claiming that he doled out lots of lashings to Jewish people. Anyway, when the Nazis came to office, the Nuremberg rallies became a very major thing. Each year had a theme. Year of Victory, the first one. There was Year of Freedom. There was a Year of the Army. There was a Year of German Unity, 1938, because they'd grabbed more land. 1939 was due to be the Year of Peace, but you can guess why that was cancelled, because Poland was invaded. But it was possibly a blind, as in to fool Poland to think, well, they can't possibly be about to invade us. They've just billed this as the Year of Peace. Anyway, so propaganda had to be aimed at the uneducated masses, not just at highly learned people. And that was a problem with German First World War propaganda. Hitler thought it was alluding to Albrecht Dürer and medieval artists too clever by half. Now, when we say propaganda, that doesn't mean it's always lies. It can be selective truth. Tell the truth when it helps your side, and just ignore those parts of the truth which are unhelpful to your side. Say anything bad about your opponent that's true, and ignore anything good about your opponent that's true. It's about exaggeration, decontextualization. Now, it can include lies, and it certainly did in the case of the Third Reich. So Rudolf Hess was Hitler's right-hand man in some senses, though he never rose to be quite as high as Herbert Göring, and he spoke fluent English, and he was very impressed by British propaganda, so possibly he was the one who convinced Hitler that they had to emulate some of the British methods.